Hi, and welcome to Mr. Block Explains the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to go over the Industrial Revolution guided notes for this unit. So let's get started with the idea of the revolution, which we've seen throughout Unit 4, with the alignment and revolutions and what keeps happening. The revolution is just a change. This is just a major change, which we saw through our urban game project, which we did last week or 2 weeks ago. So before the Industrial Revolution, most goods were made by hand in homes or in small workshops. This was called a cottage industry. So a small home, a cottage, is where people would make goods by hand in home. Very, very small facilities. You have very it's a kind of like a craftsmanship in a way. And the problem is it took a long time for people to be able to complete tasks inside their homes because guess what? There's not a lot of space. You're the only one working, maybe with another person. Were the quality of goods okay? Yeah, for the most part. But the problem was it was very inefficient. It took a long time to produce certain goods. An example I have for you here, this is a cottage industry. This is a sari shop in India when I visited. And so these two people over here, and all day what they do is they sit and they weave together on this loom the silk that it takes to make a sari or whatever material they're using. I believe it's silk. And so it takes quite a long time for them to use this machine with the foot pedals that they're using and the things that they do by hand. This is the traditional way, what would have been done in the cottage industry. And this is all done inside this essentially like it's an office space, but it's almost like not that much bigger than a regular house. And however, though, it takes them about good solid 2, 3 weeks to make one sari, which is what this person on the right next to me is wearing. She was someone who I befriended in India. And so the problem is that the cost of the sari, and the sari is like the national dress for most women in India. It's very, very popular. Many women in India and other parts around that region wear saris. So how can one place that makes saris and takes 2 3 weeks to make a single one, and they sell it for such a high cost that's incredibly expensive? How can many women in India, which it's a country of about over 1 billion people, how are they going to be able to get saris? I mean, obviously, there's a lot more loomers and sari producers throughout the entire country, but the demand is way higher than what this group can supply, and so that's why most women in India tend to wear factory-made saris because it tends to be a lot cheaper. The quality's not that bad, and the product of the good, is more efficient, and so the price goes way down, making it more affordable for most women in India, and that's how all our clothes are made today, is through the factory system. And so the rise of machines came as power-driven machines are invented. Businessmen quickly applied to making their products faster. Essentially, the faster we can make products, the more that I can make, and the more I'll be able to sell at a cheaper rate, but I'm still going to make loads of money, and the less amount of time it's going to take. And that's why machines kind of played a major, major part in a lot of these industries. And Britain. Why Britain? So here's the big reason why Britain essentially had the all of their became the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. The first thing was the enclosure movement. So what had happened was they usually had these areas called the commons where farming would be done. And the problem is a lot of the commons, if you remember from an urban game, what started to happen is this land began to become fenced off and began to be sold to other individuals, which eventually allowed for that land to then be turned into factory land. It wasn't just a big common space that everybody could use. It was essentially, well, I'm going to fence off section by section by section, and hey, now this section can go for whatever you want it to be. And so the enclosure movement helped to make that happen. The other thing is that Britain was turning to a laissez-faire economics in which the government is hands off. That's capitalism, which the government is very hands off in the regulation of the production of goods, in how trade is done, in how what companies are making. And so companies have a lot more freedom and a lot more room to kind of do what they want without necessarily being stopped and without being monitored by the government. And so this led to a lot of people investing in wanting to make natural resources and wanting to produce goods out of natural resources and looking into markets where you can get natural resources with colonies. And Britain had a huge colonial empire at that time, and it was only going to grow as the Industrial Revolution continue. But the government's kind of being hands off with this. They're letting individuals taking more of an active role in it, and that's what leads to the Industrial Revolution having such a big effect. And the biggest thing that happened was it's the textile industry. And so the textile industry, which is essentially how clothes are made, because everybody needs clothes. So just like we saw with the example of saris in India, and how factories were used to produce that, a lot of clothes and a lot of uh, products that are used by they either made with wool or cotton, they were they were produced in factories. And these textile industries, which actually was a big foundation of the North Carolina economy, textiles, essentially how can you make clothes out of these natural materials like wool and cotton. Instead of doing it by hand, now let's do it by a factory, let's do it by a machine. And the technology makes it easier and cheaper to make these goods, and they're powered by coal. So now these factories, like we saw in our urban game, can run all the time and without really any major problem. Now, with that, the big thing was that the steam engine helped, perfected by James Watt. Now factories could produce goods nonstop around the clock, especially once electricity came into power and once electricity was utilized, eventually down the road. But so the steam engine worked really well because all it was is essentially you would burn coal. And this coal would just keep burning and burning and burning, and the fire then would produce, you would use a water source to be able to produce steam, and steam would cause this turbine to run. And essentially the coal was the main pollutant, as you can see here, but the turbine then was able to gear and keep moving, keep the machines going, which is kind of how trains and steamboats work. And now you no longer depend on being by a river or a source of water to have like a wheel that's going to keep spinning and spinning and spinning, and hopefully the machines will keep going. Steam engines powered by coal made that happen a lot more powerful and a lot more efficiently. And then what they also did during the Industrial Revolution is what's called the division of labor. And what the division of labor is when small jobs are divided amongst unskilled workers, and usually very cheaply paid unskilled workers. So these small jobs are essentially, if I have a lemonade stand, if I want to make a division of labor, I can produce a lot more lemonade faster if I have somebody who is, scooping ice into the cup, and somebody who's squeezing lemons, and somebody who's mixing the sugar, and somebody who's taking, exchanging the cup for cash when the customers pay for it. Then in comparison, if I'm the only one working at the lemonade stand and I have to squeeze the lemons and I have to get the ice and I have to mix the sugar and then I have to do the exchange, well, it's going to take me a long time. But if I divvy it up into quick tasks, then it's going to be very quick and easy for me to produce lemonade for my customers. And so the tools that were helping utilize that was like the flying shuttle, which took a loom, essentially kept going back and forth to keep the strand and make a complete weave. And then the spinning jenny was also utilized during these times in the textile industries. And so the division of labor, which we use all the time now today, and which we've seen down the road, is essentially how they've been able to make goods faster, because these jobs are basically divided among workers who are working for cheap. Let's see. Next thing was that in 1815, England was producing more coal, iron, textiles than all of Europe combined. And this is all done by essentially capitalism. So these are things that are bought and sold by the people or by an individual, not by a government community member. For example, it's like we go to the mall. Okay, you go to the mall to buy clothes. You go to the mall to buy the stuff that you want to buy. You don't go to the North Carolina government to buy clothes. It doesn't really happen. You get to, people invest in kind of the clothes that they want to spend on. If someone wants to make it all denim store, and people who are interested in that are going to buy that and support it. And if it fails, it fails. But that's up to the producer and the consumer. And if the producer says, well, I want to make stuff that's all out of cotton, then it's up to the consumer to be able to buy that and support the business. But England was really cooking with capitalism and the idea that they had all these natural resources to produce lots of coal and iron and textiles, and capitalism kept funding these things to the point where they essentially became the wealthiest nation on earth as they're growing their empire and taking more land through colonies. Set up Britain really, really well during the 19th century as the Industrial Revolution is going on, and eventually this spreads throughout the rest of the world as the Industrial Revolution begins to spread throughout Europe and especially in the United States, and trade became a lot cheaper between all of these nations. That's all I got for right now. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you all around. Bye.